Thank you for joining us for tonight's August 2024 Q&A talk. I am tonight's host, Q&A Talks program coordinator, Cody McRae-Cullum. My personal pronouns are he, him, but if you are feeling bold, please feel free to refer to me by my preferred pronoun, the royal we. Q&A Talks connect rural parents and caregivers of LGBTQIA plus youth with the resources they need to ensure that they can grow up safely and authentically. Q&A Talks is an initiative of Project Q&A and is made possible by grants from the Independence Area Community Chest and the American Library Association's Libraries Transform Communities focus on rural and small library grant in partnership with the Independence Public Library. Tonight we are pleased to have Daneen Akers. Daneen Akers, she, her, is the head of Watchfire Media and has written the children's picture book Dear Mama God and the middle grade anthology Holy Troublemakers and Unconventional Saints. And also, as a filmmaker, has co-produced and directed several documentary film projects over identity, faith, and belonging, including Seventh-day Adventists, which focuses on LGBTQIA plus youth, lives rather, in the faith denomination she grew up in. Daneen Akers also teaches first-year writing at the University of North Carolina at Asheville. Please welcome Daneen Akers.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here. And I think this is a wonderful initiative. I live in a
Thank you
rural
so much. Yeah.
community. I live in a rural community myself now. I live in the county that is just next to Asheville. And we are a rural county that gets Dolly Parton's Imagination Library. So, like, my kiddos have gotten her books coming in the mail. And I grew up in a very rural part of very inland Southern California. So I did have a chunk in the middle that was urban. um, but I definitely identify as a rural resident myself. So I really understand that rural activism works differently. And a lot of our amazing organizations that do good work don't always understand how different rural activism works because it really is so much about relationships and stories and getting to know people. So I've been asked to talk about passing the torch of activism for the next generation of LGBTQIA activists, and I'm going to use some examples of people who are in the book that I wrote, Holy Troublemakers and Unconventional Saints. But I thought I'd start first with a little bit of my story because my whole premise is that stories are really the key to changing hearts and minds. That is, people might not know what they think about, X, Y, and Z, but they know this person and they know that that person, showed up when their relative passed and they brought the casserole. And, it's the stories that ultimately really everything hangs on. So I grew up in a very, very rural part of inland Southern California. My dad was a teacher at a boarding school, and so we lived way out in the sticks. I think it was like 40-minute drive to the nearest grocery store, so we were pretty far out. And I was a part of a multi-generational faith community that is quite conservative. And so it was really after you know, I was an adult and had left home before I really met and became friends with people who were not part of that faith community. It was a very insular, small world. Many beautiful things about it. I have many people in my life who still will find lots of meaning in that faith community. But I hadn't even realized that there were LGBTQ people in that faith community. It wasn't talked about at all. And it just hadn't even, crossed my consciousness. That's the sort of insular life I lived. And um, when I was pregnant with my first child, who's now 15, so this was, 16, 17 years ago, it was when California was passing Prop 8, which did end up being passed. And it was an ironic election because Barack Obama was elected to the first presidency that year, and then California passed a anti-LGBT measure that enshrined anti same-sex marriage language into the state constitution. So this really shocked me, and it shocked a lot of people. We never thought this would happen. Um, and so my husband and I decided to do something about this because we really wanted, the world our child was going to grow up in to be better. And that really started something that I had no idea what a long process it would be. It was a 10-year project that we didn't know. That was what this film ended up coming out of. It's called Seventh Gay Adventists, a film about faith on the margins. And the premise of Seventh Gay Adventists was really to tell stories. We realized that we had shifted our perspective because we got to know people. And once you get to know people, it's no longer a theoretical question. It's not an issue. Um, it's people. It's people you care about. So we actually cut a version of the film early on that we really knew would never go anywhere. It was the angry film. It was the like something bad has been done version. And we got that out of our systems. And then the film actually just follows over the course of several years. We filmed for quite a while, three people who are deeply part of this denomination, their entire lives, families, education, sometimes work is deeply embedded in this community and trying to wrestle with being their authentic selves. And, how does that go? How does that work with your family? So it's really a simple film that just follows people's stories. And we went around the country. By the time the film was done, our daughter was 3, almost 4. So it took a while just to make the film. And then we went around for a year. Um, we were nomadic. We couldn't afford to like keep our rent and travel with the film. So we went around to film festivals. It screened at LGBTQ film festivals all over the United States, but also in Australia, in Brazil, trying to think some of the other Canada, some of the other places that it screened. And we traveled with it and we tried to start discussions and we would also host community screenings because we knew that there were people, especially religious conservatives, who needed to see the film, who probably wouldn't go to an LGBT film festival in the same way that there were people who were going to the LGBT film festival who would not go to a church to watch the film for also, you know, um, for good reasons and a lot of harm that's been done. So we hosted personally over 80 probably screenings and discussions all over the country. And I remember I would watch people walk in, and sometimes if it was at an LGBTQ festival, I could tell people were worried, like, how religious this is. Is this going to feel like traumatic, experiencing some of the religious rejection that too often happens? And then in other settings, I would see what I could tell were religious, like elders coming to check out what was going on and being really resistant. Um, but by the end, when you've spent an hour and a half with someone's story, you just don't have the same posture that you had before. You soften a bit, even if you don't know exactly what you can't necessarily write a theological treatise on where you land now, but you realize that people are a lot more alike than different. And once you get to know someone's story, you no longer can see them, you can't objectify them. They become humanized in a way that often our political rhetoric, especially right now, does not. So that was really how I got started in activism. And it just came from a personal situation of realizing that, the church I grew up in had not treated people well. And I wanted something different for my daughter. I now have 2 daughters. I don't consider myself a part of this church anymore, um, at least theologically, but I still have a lot of fondness for this film, for the people in it. They'll always be family to us. Um, but so then what happened is when I had young children, I I had a sense of faith myself. Spirituality has always been very, very much a part of who I am, but I didn't want to tell them the same stories that I had grown up with because they didn't really fit in the same way, you know? Um, my my daughter, my oldest one, she wanted an expansive uh faith story, and a lot of the books that we'd been passed down just didn't work. So eventually that's how I came to write Holy Troublemakers and Unconventional Saints, which is an anthology of different people of faith, different types of faith who have worked for love and justice. Um, Bayard Rustin being one of the originals, and I'll talk about him just a second. And this book came out 5 years ago. It came out right before COVID, actually, the December of 2019. So that was a whole experience too. Think having the book come out right before COVID, and then that was a whole shift for all of us, I know. And then I wrote a picture book called Dear Mama God, because one of the things that I realized when doing the Seventh Day Adventist documentary is that um, misogyny and homophobia are two sides of the same coin. They definitely go together. Um, and that our God language, which, even especially in the United States, even if you're not a person of faith, we are a country that's deeply affected by faith, and sometimes a lot of the fights today. So finding more expansive language for the divine felt super important. So this is a simple prayer book, um, inspired by actual prayers my youngest daughter prayed to Mama God. She grew up with a more, so this one is, thank you for trees for birds to build nests in. It's thank you for seeds that grow into plants. It's just a very simple gratitude book. But it's just addressed to to God in mothering form, which is actually super biblical. We don't have to go into that right now, but there's a I realize that our language, even about the divine and the way that it has been so masculinized and like stuck in one metaphor, I feel like it really influences even the anti-LGBTQ um, issues that we see today. So that's my story of how I have come to activism. Um, and the the people in Holy Troublemakers, and in the film, they all inspire me. But at a time like this, when political rhetoric is super, super challenging right now, and I just think like, oh, what is happening? And I get really discouraged about the future. Climate. There's all kinds of things that can get me feeling pretty discouraged. I find the people in this book to be amazing focus points because they've been through many, many, many more challenging times. So I like to start. One of the things that Bayard Rustin has taught me, and for anybody who doesn't know, Bayard Rustin is really a civil rights icon that we should all know about. He planned the March on Washington, where Dr. Martin Luther King gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. He was a major, major teacher to that entire movement on nonviolence and nonviolent movements and nonviolent strategies. He helped train the people who were going to be doing sit-ins at the lunch counters, because it is one thing to be an activist. It's another thing to commit to doing it non-violently. It is so much harder, and takes so much more control to not respond in violence when somebody treats you with violence. But that is definitely a core theme in this book, is social change through nonviolence, which actually in the history of the world, most the most effective long-term movements have been through nonviolent methods. They it's the violent ones might have some exciting times, but it gets dramatic pretty darn quick. Not that it doesn't in nonviolence movements, but there's a higher ethic of understanding that uh, people aren't the enemy. There might be bad and harmful ideologies, but actually, Dr. King and Bayard Rustin talked about something called the double victory, which is it's not just that the currently oppressed people, um, so LGBTQ youth, who in so many states, especially like trans youth, are being, targeted for harmful legislation and inflammatory rhetoric and things like that. It's not just trying to liberate people who are currently oppressed. You don't just want to like switch the you're not just trying to switch the hierarchy. You actually, the goal is for those who are currently subscribed to harmful beliefs and harmful ideologies to themselves understand that they are enacting harm, and for them to also be transformed. So that's the double victory.
If
And
I
it's a
may,
yeah,
it reminds
absolutely.
me of Toni Morrison. You know,
Mm,
when you are free, when you have that liberation, it is your job to free someone else, to
absolutely.
liberate the mind of someone that clearly doesn't see the rationale and the humanity there, and
Yeah.
allow that liberation to inform your attitudes and behaviors toward them. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I find that really important to remember, especially as an election season is coming up again, that, people aren't the enemy. Yeah, so Bayard Rustin was also a Quaker. He was raised in Pennsylvania and went to his grandmother was a really devout Quaker, and Quakers have a long history of nonviolence and pacifism. So that was definitely a part of his legacy. And in addition to civil rights, he went on to work for especially refugee rights and LGBTQ rights. He was given posthumously, unfortunately, this was after he had died, the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Obama, which is the highest honor a civilian can receive. One of his quotes that I love is, "We are all one, and if we don't know it, we will learn it the hard way." So his phrase is actually, he talked about needing angelic troublemakers. And these are people committed to nonviolently making sure the status quo doesn't work when that status quo was harming people. So he's really the person who inspired the whole, or, originally inspired the book. But I just shortened it to Holy Troublemakers. The next person I wanted to talk about, because she's from Kansas, which I believe is where your organization is from, is Jennifer Knapp. Yeah. So Jennifer Knapp, she's an amazing singer-songwriter. Grew up in Chanute, Kansas, and became well, she was an amazing musician from a young age. She's actually now known most for her guitar playing, but she actually went to college on a trumpet scholarship. So if anybody's ever lucky enough to go to a Jennifer Knapp concert, sometimes she pulls out the trumpet, actually. Excuse me. So Jennifer um, made it uh, made it very big in the Christian music world. In fact, I remember having, well, the Christian music world was a little racy from where I grew up because it had drums and but I do remember the occasional CD compilation that would get around, and Jennifer Knapp was one of the singer-songwriters on that. And in fact, her album Kansas was nominated for a Grammy. It's been 25 last year, I think was the 25-year anniversary of that. So that is her first Kansas. People who don't know it, she actually just recorded a new version of that um, last year as like a celebration. But she really didn't like the machinery of the Christian music world for a lot of reasons. It really wanted her to churn out songs that were like happy, you know, Jesus is my boyfriend, I'm happy all the time kind of music, and that didn't feel realistic to her, and so she didn't write that kind of music. And then she also realized that she was starting to fall in love with a woman. So she actually took a break from the whole Christian music world, and from kind of everything. She went to Australia for 7 years. People, and this is like pre-social media, so people just she just kind of disappeared. Her record label was kept turning out sort of remixes of her old stuff to sort of just keep selling anything, but she stopped playing music. She couldn't figure out how she could be a lesbian and a person of faith, because those had always felt like either or. Um, and eventually she started to ask herself if it could be both and. So eventually she came back. Uh, Christian, she came out rather publicly. She was interviewed on Larry King live, like, and he made her sort of like defend. Can you biblically defend, you know, being a Christian and a gay person, which was it's a great segment to watch. She held her ground beautifully. She's a really really articulate, intelligent woman. Um, but so yeah, a lot of Christian radio stations just completely banned, deleted her. People were saying that they like burned her, their cassettes and CDs of her. So she really had to start entirely over. I super respect her for that. But she is still out there singing, performing on the road. Her music is amazing. Um, and one of the things that she taught me about activism, she said she came back from Australia, knowing what she was going to face. She knew the Christian music world was going to eat her alive. And she wasn't wrong. But she said, I came back to help all of the other LGBTQ kids out there know that these things are survivable. And I just really respect that, because she could have just disappeared into the outback. And she didn't. She decided to come back, face what she knew would be a terribly difficult situation, and prove that you could get through it. She felt strong and that she could do that. And she now runs, in addition to her music, she runs a nonprofit called Inside Out Faith, and its whole point is to help share stories of LGBTQ people of faith, because there's such a strong narrative out there. If something comes up on the news, they'll put they'll put an LGBTQ activist, and then they'll put like some random evangelical Christian pastor, and they make it seem so strongly that it's an either or binary choice, but it isn't. And in fact, uh, there's been several surveys of the last few years, both from Pew, GLAAD has done a lot of reporting on this also, that one of the only demographics that is increasing in like religious affiliation is LGBTQ people who are religiously affiliated. Almost every other demographic is disaffiliating in high numbers, especially since COVID, when things got, so disrupted. But the faith demographic of Christians, Muslims, Jews who are LGBTQ and follow their religious tradition is actually increasing. It's over 50% of the LGBT population, like it's like 56%, um, who identify as strongly a person of faith. And that is just not a public narrative that we know much about. And I think it really deserves more attention, because by allowing the narrative that you are either a Christian or your authentic LGBTQ self, all it does is falsely make it seem that there's some sort of biblical thing out there, which really there's not, if you are remotely like educated on the background of the like the handful of texts. If only the people who got upset about that were equally passionate about the hundreds of texts about taking care of the widow and not turning away the refugee. um Jubilee every 49 years, where all debts are to be forgiven and land is to be returned, things like that. For some reason, like those topics never get nearly as much attention. So anyway, Jennifer, I think, does a marvelous job of really showing a both and narrative, and trying to, challenge those binary assumptions that you're either a person of faith or you're LGBTQ, and like it's just not true. My book is full, full. I think of more than half of the profiles in here are either themselves LGBTQ or parents of, or some very very close. So definitely a narrative that we need to challenge. So the third holy troublemaker I wanted to bring forward tonight, she just had a new children's book come out yesterday, um, is Valerie Kaur, who is a Sikh activist and faith leader and nonviolent teacher who also grew up um, in a rural area. She grew up in Central California in the Valley. Her grandfather um, was a farmer, and she, she and Jennifer Knapp are also rural origin stories. And she experienced racism as a child. People telling, like, this one boy in particular, like telling her to like go back to where she came from. She's like, my family's been here for 100 years. Um, and so learning more about Sikhs was really, really interesting for me in writing this book. It's also pronounced Sikh. Both pronunciations can be used. She tends to use Sikh, so that's the one that I like to use. And she talks about being a warrior for revolutionary love. Um, and revolutionary love is a love that stands up to protect people who are at risk. And she really has some beautiful, beautiful teachings. She's written a book also where she says that, you know, loving people who might disagree with us, like loving your opponent, especially if it's an opponent who's, say, voting to take away your rights. It doesn't mean you have to have warm, fuzzy feelings about them. Nobody's asking that. She says what it is you have to remain in a state of wonder and curiosity. You have to wonder about that person. What makes them tick? What is their story? If we can keep wonder and curiosity, then we can keep that person's humanity central, even if they're dehumanizing us or other groups of people, or even sometimes themselves. Um, like that is the hard work of being an activist in a nonviolent way where you're not actually causing more harm and just, victimizing another group of people, is to maintain the strong, strong conviction of our shared humanity. And I find that Valerie Kaur is constantly helping me to do that. When I don't know what to think or say about like events in the world that are breaking my heart, I often will turn to her Instagram, or she writes a newsletter also that I find really beautiful. So she is one, and in fact, she wears a necklace. It's a little hard to see. It's a symbol, um, the Ik Onkar, that is important to Sikh people, and it means we are one. And that is like what she is trying to do through her activism, is like, remember, we are one. Because if we forget that, even if we're doing good things for our activism, like we ultimately will harm ourselves and other people. And then I wanted to share two quick bonus people, because I find this is sorely needed for me, and sometimes for all activists. The first is Reverend Jackie Lewis, who is a modern day holy troublemaker. She's in New York, and she's a pastor. And she has a book called Fierce Love. It's very similar to Valerie Kaur's revolutionary love concept. In fact, they're friends and they know each other. And she really talks about joy as an important part of activism and resistance to harmful status quos. And I think it's can be really hard to prioritize that, like, we are humans who need rest, we need joy, we need wonder, like gratitude. Like you can get really, really focused in activism. And I think we will not inspire the next generation of activists if we're just burnt out ourselves. And so I think figuring out how to balance that is tricky. So Reverend Jackie really teaches me that. And then always Mary Oliver, who I I really, really love Mary Oliver, the poet, um, teacher, who really taught that attention is the beginning of devotion. And people forget that Mary Oliver was queer also. That's not something that's talked about often in her story, but she and her partner, Molly Malone, lived in, uh, I think for like 40 years in Provincetown and up in Massachusetts. And I have found Mary Oliver's poetry to really be like my devotions now. And in fact, she has a compilation called Devotions that I highly recommend. Starting my day with that poem, and I'll even write them out in like a journal. It's almost like writing out a prayer. Um, it helps ground me into the immediate world right around me and find a moment of wonder. And something that I know is of huge importance to all of us right now is the awareness of how much anxiety and anxiety related conditions, especially our LGBTQ youth, are going through. Really, all of the youth are having a mental health crisis at the moment, or a large percentage, I should say, in all demographics, is what I mean. LGBTQ youth, especially, because of the harms and the stress of growing up in a society where it is not automatically assumed that your well-being is everybody's top priority. And I have recently learned, because of my own experience with anxiety, that the number one antidote to anxiety, and this is not to say that medication and therapy and all of the things are not necessary, but the number one antidote is awe and wonder. Awe and wonder is an amazing antidote for anxiety, and our modern life has, there's so many things like this, actual live stream right now that technology has given us, but it's also kept us like easily in this loop of rumination and things that keep us very focused on our own mental chatter and on also what like other people might be thinking of us. And that's like especially true at adolescence age. And like I now have a teenager, so I speak with this, personal knowledge also that everything about our phones is sort of a human referent. Um, what do they think of me? What do I think of me? What image am I projecting to myself? And like the news, like nobody's sitting through news of like the beautiful hummingbird that just landed over there today. Like that's not what's coming through in our news feeds. And so wonder and awe takes us outside of ourselves. And all you need, there's a ton of research coming out about this. The Center for Greater Good in Berkeley is a really good place for this. And there's many books that are coming out right now. One's literally called Awe, um, and he's one of the researchers at the Center for Greater Good in Berkeley. And the all you need is 15 minutes um, in a more than human setting. It can be in a like a park, looking at one plant, paying attention to a bird, a moth, like it just watching an ant crawl. Like it just needs to be outside of our own heads and paying attention to the more than human world, without the constant phone distraction. But all you need is 15 minutes, and like the physiological factors of like our heart rate and our mental chatter, like all kinds of things improve with simply 15 minutes, which is a remarkable thing. So like I have started trying to leave my phone somewhere inconvenient uh in the morning. Like I got myself a physical clock. Like it's an old school clock that can set an alarm so I don't have to like have an alarm next to me. I got a white noise machine so I don't have to like play white noise on my like the reasons I don't have my phone like next to me at night, and I try to put it somewhere charging that's inconvenient. Like I have a scary basement and I'll often try to charge the phone down there because I don't like to go down there. And I will try to start the day like with a Mary Oliver poem, like trying to find a bird or looking at something that makes me pay attention to the natural world, which really, we humans, like we all like for millennia were paying attention. Like the natural world was like our book. It's what we read. Um, it's what we were intimately aware of, and we've gotten so disconnected from that now. And I think it has taken the like I know it's taken the toll on my body. So trying to come back to that awareness, have a cup of coffee, and of course I have to get to the phone and see what like 50 million texts are coming from my kid's school or whatever, is going on that day. But if I can just start with like 20 minutes, half hour, we occasionally try to take a phone-free Sabbath. Uh, so I grew up in a Sabbatarian tradition, so that language works for me. We take a digital Sabbath. I used to try to do it once a week. It's really hard to do that with kids' schedules, and it takes planning. And I had to get like another phone, just like a flip phone that like people could call if they needed us. You have to like work at it. And of course it was like wailing and gnashing of teeth with my children. Um, but once we actually got used to it, and I was inspired to do that by a rabbi in this book, Rabbi Danya Rutenberg, who's also really incredible. And she, said like she grew up Jewish but atheist, and then she came back to a sense of spirituality in her early 20s, which really surprised her. And now she's a rabbi. And she talks about like it shocks her that she takes an actual, as I find her photo here, her portrait, I should say. So this is Rabbi Danya Rutenberg. And yeah, she said, yeah, I want to watch the Netflix show, or I want to do the thing. But what I recognize is that, my community has been doing this practice for thousands of years. And yeah, sometimes you need to modernize the rules because it was set up in a harmful way. But sometimes it's actually relieves a great deal of stress on you of like making all these decisions if you can step into a practice that's already been happening. But you only get the benefit if you step into the practice. And so yeah, when I interviewed her for Holy Troublemakers, I was like, you know what? I want to start doing some Sabbath keeping again, even though I don't do it the way that I grew up. Um, but yeah, so we'll like light a candle, um, turn off the devices. My husband and I do it too. Like the adults have to do it too. And you have to communicate ahead of time to anybody you might be meeting the next day, like, hey, don't freak out if you don't hear from us. Like, we're planning to be there. We have the devices turned off. So you kind of have to like let people know, or like my mother-in-law will definitely think that we've like died. Um, and yeah, it's amazing the the peace that happens after like just one day of that. The whole family has started to appreciate that. So like I really do think that an important part of activism is tending to our human bodies and self. And I wasn't very good at that when I was younger. I was like righteous, like we're gonna change things. Um, and I think in my middle-aged wisdom, I've started to realize that many of these harmful systems, they've been set up for a long time, and I'm not going to dismantle them by myself, and very likely not entirely in my lifetime, like this is work of generations. And that doesn't mean you don't do the work. You do the work because it's the right work, not because you're necessarily seeing the results right now. Lots of people in this book did not see the results in their lifetimes of things that they started. Like you don't know the seeds, you plant the seeds and you don't know what season the conditions are going to be right for them to bloom. Um, so yeah, I'm losing, sorry, I'm going off there, but like tending to our actual needs and joy and soul and rest and wonder, I now think is a super important part of being an effective activist. Otherwise, you just burn out and get bitter. That's what was happening to me. And I realized I wasn't helping myself or or anyone by doing that. So I do think that's part of modeling the story of what it means to be an activist, of what it means to want the world to work so that we all can flourish, which is, what I want.
Absolutely, absolutely. I would say, as a reminder, self-love and self-care are revolutionary acts. We
Hmm.
have to, as activists, engage with ourselves and our own needs,
Yeah.
take care of our our vessel, our lives, our spirits. We
Yeah.
need rest and gratitude and all of these good things to replenish, really. And also, you reminded me of a quotation. The source is slipping my mind, but the basic gist of it is that be not dismayed at the enormity of the world's grief. You are not expected to complete the work. Neither are you allowed to dismiss or shrivel back
Abandon it.
from it. Abandon it. Thank you. That was the
It's
word.
it's
Yes.
Rab it's Rabbi Tarfon.
You're right. It is Toadphone. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
I used I was looking, it's I often keep it printed up here. I think it's behind a
Excellent.
piece of paper.
Excellent.
Yeah.
It is such an important reminder, especially for the message of Tikkun Olam, the repair of the world, that,
Yeah.
it's not going to be the work of one person. That doesn't mean that you are free to abandon it. Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for bringing that in. I love that.
Absolutely. If I can ever bring in that quotation from Toadphone, I'm definitely going to do it. All right.
So
Yeah.
that's my that's what I've got, and I would be happy to stick around for the private Q&A if anybody wants to join that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've got just one more thing to say, and then we'll roll with that. Yeah. Thank you to all who tuned in and our partners at the Independence Public Library and our funding sources, the Independence Area Community Chest and the American Library Association. Thank you to Daneen Akers for a wonderful presentation. If you would like to continue the conversation with Daneen on Zoom, follow the link in the comments. Be sure to tune in next time to Q&A Talks. We will be talking with Miss Hyla on the evening of Wednesday, October 16th, 2024 at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. She will be discussing managing mental health during the holiday season. If you would like to find out more about Project Q&A, our work, or to view past Q&A talks, please visit our website and follow us on social media. To support the work we are doing in rural communities, please consider making a tax-deductible donation today. Thank you for watching our Q&A talk this month. If you have any questions for our presenter, follow the link in the comments. Thank you and have a wonderful evening. All right, it'll take me just a moment to close down the live stream.